Two cars, same number of seats, same touchscreen dashboard, same plug going into the same wall outlet every night. One of them costs $9,000. The other costs $40,000. And before you assume the $9,000 car is a glorified golf cart with a warranty held together by optimism, consider what that gap actually represents in human terms. At the median American household income, $31,000 is 4 months of gross pay. In Germany, closer to 6. In Brazil, it is more than a year. The cheaper car seats for adults, handles a daily commute, and charges overnight on a standard outlet. Exactly like the expensive one. Something is producing that gap, and it is not a quality shortcut or a government check written directly to the buyer. It is a manufacturing philosophy. And the company that built it has been quietly outselling the most famous electric vehicle brand on Earth. That story deserves a serious look. Tesla earned its position the hard way, and that fact matters before anything else gets said. Before the Model S arrived, the electric vehicle was a compliance product, underpowered, range-limited, and designed primarily to satisfy a regulatory requirement rather than a customer. Tesla changed the terms of the argument entirely. They made range, performance, and software the center of what an electric vehicle was supposed to be, and every other manufacturer on Earth had to respond on Tesla's terms. That is not a minor achievement. That is a decade of industry redirection built on genuine engineering conviction. The Model 3 is a genuinely excellent automobile. The supercharger network it connects to remains the most reliable fast-charging infrastructure in North America and Europe, built over more than a decade into a footprint no competitor has yet matched. Over-the-air software updates have meaningfully improved vehicles already sitting in owners' driveways, a capability that most legacy automakers are still fumbling to execute. And the brand still carries real meaning. Tesla's share of the American electric vehicle market hovered near 50% through 2023, which translates to something concrete. For roughly every 2 electric vehicles on an American road, one of them is a Tesla. That is the gravitational center of the industry. Tesla makes a genuinely great car. Nobody is arguing otherwise. But a great car is not the same thing as a fair price for transportation. And those two things have been quietly separating for 3 years. BYD built a 4-seat electric vehicle that does everything most urban and suburban drivers actually need a car to do. Commute, park, charge at home, seat a family for a grocery run, and priced it at the equivalent of $9,000. Tesla charges $40,000 for comparable function. That gap is not a fluke, not a subsidy mechanism that evaporates under scrutiny, and not a reflection of a worse product hiding behind a lower number. It is the output of a manufacturing system designed from the ground up to win on cost structure, and it is now the most consequential price signal in the global auto industry. The vehicle is called the Seagull. The company is BYD, and the cost advantage breaks into 4 distinct structural decisions, each one the result of choices Tesla either cannot make or chose not to. The first advantage shows up the moment a buyer traces the sticker price backward to the single most expensive component in any electric vehicle, the battery. This is where the $31,000 gap begins, and it begins at the chemistry and manufacturing level before a single bolt is turned on an assembly line. Tesla sources battery cells primarily from outside suppliers, a relationship that embeds a supplier profit margin into the component that represents roughly 30 to 40% of a vehicle's total manufacturing cost, according to industry analysts. That is not a criticism specific to Tesla. It reflects how virtually every Western automaker has historically operated. You design the vehicle. Someone else makes the expensive part. You pay their price. BYD made a different decision 20 years ago and has spent 2 decades building toward the consequences of it. The Seagull runs on BYD's Blade battery, a lithium iron phosphate cell that BYD designs, patents, and manufactures inside its own corporate structure. The blade architecture eliminates the traditional module and pack approach by arranging cells into a structural array that becomes part of the vehicle's floor. No module housings, no inter-module wiring harnesses, no redundant structural support layer between the cells and the chassis. One less manufacturing step means one less cost center, and BYD captures it entirely in-house because they are simultaneously the cell manufacturer and the automaker. Industry cost analysts estimate BYD's battery cost per kilowatt hour sits at or near the lowest of any major manufacturer globally. Exact figures are not publicly disclosed, but the competitive position is reflected clearly in the pricing. Lithium iron phosphate chemistry also uses no cobalt, a material with volatile pricing and concentrated supply geography, removing another cost variable that more complex chemistries carry as permanent overhead. Over a 10-year ownership horizon, this matters in a second way. Lithium iron phosphate cells degrade more slowly at high states of charge and tolerate substantially more complete charge cycles before meaningful capacity loss, according to battery research reports. The buyer who never faces a battery replacement has effectively added $10,000 to $20,000 back to the ownership ledger. BYD's global electric vehicle sales volume passed Tesla's in the fourth quarter of 2023 and has traded the top position in multiple quarters since, according to industry sales filings. That volume does not happen by accident at a $9,000 price point, unless the cost structure underneath it is genuinely different. The second advantage appears not in the product itself, but in the organizational architecture that produces it, specifically in how many separate companies touch a vehicle before it reaches a buyer, and how many of those companies attach a profit margin to their portion. Tesla, despite its reputation for vertical ambition, purchases a substantial share of its component ecosystem from external suppliers. Seat assemblies, HVAC systems, power electronics, and until recently, the majority of its semiconductor supply. Each of those supplier relationships embeds a margin into the component before it arrives at a Tesla factory. On a $40,000 vehicle, those stacked margins are invisible in the sticker. They are simply part of the price. BYD's vertical integration extends across semiconductors through its own semiconductor subsidiary, electric motors, power electronics, battery management systems, and core structural components. This is not partial integration pursued as a cost experiment. It is a 2-decade architectural decision. When a global chip shortage idled production lines across the automotive industry in 2021 and 2022, industry reports indicated BYD's in-house semiconductor capacity allowed it to maintain production continuity that outsourced competitors could not match. The supply chain is not a vulnerability for BYD. It is infrastructure they own. Industry estimates suggest a deeply vertically integrated manufacturer can reduce bill of materials cost by 15 to 25% relative to a comparable outsourced model, according to automotive cost analysts. And that compression goes directly into the price a buyer sees. For a fleet operator purchasing 50 vehicles for a corporate pool or a rideshare operation, the margin overhead embedded in Western EV pricing becomes a 6-figure line item before the vehicles complete their first year of service. BYD's gross margin on vehicles has remained competitive with Tesla's across multiple recent quarters, despite dramatically lower average selling prices, according to financial filings. And that arithmetic only works if the cost base is structurally lower, not if the product is simply built to a lesser standard. The third advantage emerges not at purchase and not on a spec sheet, but on the night a new owner plugs in for the first time and realizes the battery management anxiety that NMC chemistry owners navigate simply does not apply to them. Lithium iron phosphate chemistry is inherently more thermally stable than nickel manganese cobalt formulations. It is less prone to thermal events under charging stress, which reduces the engineering overhead required in the thermal management system wrapped around it. Simpler thermal management means fewer components, fewer failure points, and lower manufacturing cost baked into every unit. For the buyer, it means charging to 100% every night, without the degradation concern that leads NMC owners to set their charge limit to 80% as a protective habit. That behavioral cost, the mild but persistent management overhead of owning a chemistry that penalizes you for full charges, simply disappears. Lithium iron phosphate cells are commonly rated for 3,000 or more charge cycles before reaching 80% capacity, compared to figures that industry technical reports place materially lower for many NMC variants depending on the specific formulation and management approach. For a driver charging daily, that translates to a battery that realistically outlasts the structural life of the vehicle without replacement. A battery replacement on a Model 3 outside of warranty runs $10,000 to $20,000 depending on configuration, according to repair industry estimates. A Seagull owner who never encounters that bill has recovered a sum that exceeds the vehicle's original purchase price over a long enough ownership window. LFP chemistry has moved from a niche cost reduction choice to the dominant chemistry in global EV production by volume, with multiple analysts projecting it will represent the majority of new electric vehicle battery deployments through 2030. A market consensus that validates the chemistry the Seagull was engineered around from its first production unit. The fourth advantage does not appear on a test drive and will not show up in a brochure. It appears 3 years after purchase, on the afternoon an owner checks what the market will actually pay for their vehicle and discovers the depreciation curve does not behave the way a $9,000 car is supposed to. Tesla cut new vehicle prices aggressively and repeatedly after 2022, a pricing strategy that was rational from a volume perspective, but imposed a direct financial penalty on existing owners. A buyer who paid $47,000 for a Model 3 in 2022 found the vehicle worth substantially less by 2024 as new vehicle pricing dropped, according to automotive market data. That is not a mechanical failure. It is a corporate pricing decision that treats existing customers as acceptable collateral. The Seagull's resale dynamic operates on different math. When the purchase price anchors at $9,000, the nominal depreciation required to damage an owner's financial position is compressed dramatically. A vehicle that sells used for $6,000 has lost $3,000 in nominal terms, less than the insurance cost differential on the more expensive vehicle over the same period. BYD's ongoing development of the Seagull platform continues adding features to each model year, but the LFP battery's long cycle life means the mechanical value proposition of an older unit stays defensible to used car buyers who understand the chemistry. In markets where the Seagull has established a multi-year presence, automotive market reports indicate used units move quickly and hold competitive values within their segment. The clearest market signal, though, is the gray market import activity reported in markets where the Seagull is not yet officially sold. When buyers in a country with no official sales channel pay import premiums to obtain a specific vehicle, the demand signal is about as unambiguous as the market can produce. Tesla is not going to lose this argument on product quality, and it is worth being precise about where the incumbent genuinely still wins. The Model 3's range advantage is real and meaningful. 270 plus miles against the Seagull's approximately 140 to 150 real-world miles is not a rounding difference. It is a use case boundary that matters for anyone whose driving life extends beyond urban and suburban commuting. The supercharger network is real infrastructure that took over a decade to build and does not disappear because a cheaper car exists. The software integration depth, the over-the-air update capability, and the driver assistance feature set have no equivalent in the Seagull's current form. And crash safety testing, where the Model 3 holds strong ratings across major testing regimes, represents an engineering investment that a $9,000 vehicle at current specifications does not fully replicate. But here is where the incumbent's own roadmap becomes the most telling part of the argument. Tesla's answer to a $9,000 Chinese EV is a $25,000 vehicle that has been announced, delayed, reframed, and repositioned multiple times since 2020, with production timelines that industry observers have tracked with increasing skepticism. The gap between a $25,000 ambition and a $9,000 reality on the road tells you something precise about the structural floor of Tesla's cost base. Their own engineers, working inside their own supply chain, cannot reach the price that BYD reached at volume. That is not a criticism of Tesla's engineering. It is a description of a cost architecture that was built for a different market position. The regulatory context widens the picture further. The United States imposed a 100% tariff on Chinese manufactured electric vehicles in 2024, a trade policy decision that explicitly acknowledged what an unrestricted market would produce. The European Union launched its own anti-subsidy investigation and imposed additional duties on BYD and other Chinese manufacturers in the same period. Governments do not impose emergency tariffs on products that are not competitive. The tariff is the acknowledgement, written into law, that without the barrier, the competitive pressure would be immediate and structural. The stakes here have moved beyond one vehicle and one company. They have reached the question of whether Western electric vehicle manufacturers can close a cost gap that is architectural before the political will to maintain those barriers erodes. That is an industry-level question, and the clock is running. Tesla is not going anywhere. The supercharger network is real. The brand carries genuine meaning for buyers who want what Tesla specifically offers. The range, the software depth, the identity. That is a real market, and it will persist. But something has shifted that does not reverse. The Seagull proved that a 4-seat electric vehicle capable of handling everything a city driver actually does every day can be built and sold profitably at $9,000. That proof exists now. It cannot be unproven. And every buyer who encounters that number, an increasingly large population, will ask one question: what exactly am I paying the other $31,000 for? The answer had better be more than a logo. American and European manufacturers spent a decade arguing that an affordable electric vehicle was a fantasy, that battery costs, safety requirements, and development overhead set a floor that made a $10,000 electric car structurally impossible. BYD did not argue. They built it, shipped it, and priced it. The generation of buyers entering the car market right now does not carry 40 years of brand allegiance to honor. They have a monthly budget and a charging outlet. And the next billion car buyers, in the markets where the Seagull is already sold, in the economies where $40,000 is not a car payment, but a life decision, will form their first EV habits on the brand that showed up at the price they could actually afford. That is not a product story anymore. That is a market story, and it is just getting started. If you want to see more, click the video on screen now.